story begins in a place most maps did not bother to name. A crooked farmhouse stood at the edge of the woods, its timbers sagging, its windows dull with dust. At night, only a faint orange glow spilled from its chimney, while every other pane remained black, as though the house itself had learned to hide its secrets. Inside that house, a child was born, a girl whose fate was sealed before her first cry filled the air. She was not born into freedom, nor choice, nor the promise of love. She was born into a lineage that folded in on itself, a bloodline trapped in its own reflection. From the first breath, she belonged not to herself, but to the family's design. Her name is rarely spoken now, and in the few places it is whispered, it trembles like a curse. To her parents, she was not truly a daughter, she was a vessel, a keeper of blood. They wrapped her in old quilts stitched by the hands of women who had followed the same cruel path, women who had raised children only to bind them again to the family, never to strangers, never to outsiders. Every stitch carried the weight of obedience, every seam sewn tight enough to suffocate. She grew up inside a silence so heavy it pressed against her chest like iron. The world beyond her family's land might as well have been a dream, a
Subscribe to my
painted
channel.
backdrop glimpsed only from the attic window. The trees were tall and dark, swaying in winds that never reached her room. She could hear church bells faintly on Sundays, muffled by hills and distance, and sometimes the laughter of children from the nearest town. But no one ever came to her door. No friends, no neighbors, no voices save those of her own blood. The very voices that one day would command her to give up her body to a brother. Her mother was a hollow-eyed woman who carried shame like a veil, but shame never freed her. She spoke rarely, and when she did, her words clung to scripture twisted into chains. "We do not break what has been set before us," she whispered, as though someone might be listening from the shadows. Her father was colder still, a man carved from stone and silence who believed that blood was sacred only when kept pure, not pure in holiness, but pure in itself, locked in a circle that suffocated generation after generation. He never raised his voice, because he did not need to. His silence carried more weight than violence ever could. The girl's brother was 2 years older. From childhood they were paired together, not as playmates, not as siblings in the true sense of the word, but as two pieces of a single puzzle, forced into a shape neither wanted. They were taught to eat side by side, to pray side by side, to walk always as if joined. When neighbors asked why the children were never allowed to attend school, the father only answered that what belongs to family stays with family. The neighbors, uneasy, stopped asking questions. Rumors grew, but in small towns rumors are buried as quickly as they are spoken, covered over with the soil of politeness and fear. By 12, she felt the noose tightening around her future. Whispers reached her ears, even when she tried not to hear them. Late at night, from the bottom of the stairs, she listened as her father and mother spoke in voices low but urgent. "She will be ready soon," her father muttered. "It must be done, as it was always done. Blood answers to blood." Her mother's voice broke as she replied, "But she is still a child." He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the lantern. "Then she will grow, and she will know her place." Her childhood dissolved in that sentence. The attic became her refuge, the only space where she could breathe without eyes watching. She pressed her hands against the wooden beams, feeling the grain of the boards, imagining they were gates she might one day push open. The attic window became her only friend, its glass so clouded with dust she could barely see the hills beyond. She drew shapes with her finger, tracing circles and stars in the dirt of the pane, whispering to herself that there must be more than this house, more than these walls, more than this family. But every whisper vanished into silence. At 14, the lessons began in earnest. Her mother guided her through rituals that seemed half religion, half punishment. The family Bible was laid open at night, its pages yellowed and damp. Her mother's hand trembled as she pointed to verses about obedience, about women submitting, about silence before God. But the words were spoken with a hollow heart, for even her mother knew this was no true scripture, only a veil to hide the family's hunger for control. The girl wanted to ask, why me? Why him? Why us? But her tongue froze. Questions were forbidden. Her brother avoided her eyes. At night, when the house was quiet, she could hear him pacing in his room, the floorboards creaking under restless feet. Sometimes she thought she heard him weep, muffled against his pillow. In those moments, she hated him and pitied him all at once. He was a victim, too, raised to believe that his destiny was entwined with hers, whether either of them wanted it or not. They were not siblings in the way other children were siblings. They were two lambs driven toward the same altar, bound together by ropes neither had tied. By 16, she understood that there was no escape. The wedding would come. Not a wedding of joy, not a celebration, but a ceremony whispered in secret, away from the church, away from neighbors, away from the eyes of the world. The dress she wore would be sewn from her mother's old fabric, handed down like a curse, faded lace yellowed with decades of sorrow. The ring would not be gold, but iron, forged not in love, but in duty. And so, her girlhood died in silence, smothered by expectation. The farmhouse loomed darker with every passing year, its windows like blind eyes staring outward, guarding the secret within. Candles flickered late into the night, shadows stretching across the walls like chains. Outside, the town carried on. Farmers worked their fields. Children learned in their schoolhouse. Church bells rang with hymns of mercy. But inside that house, mercy never came. By the time she turned 18, the truth was clear. She was not to choose her husband. She was not to seek love or friendship or a life beyond the woods. She was to fulfill a plan older than she was, older than her parents, a plan carved into the very bones of the family. She was raised for one purpose: to marry her own brother, to keep the bloodline locked inside itself, no matter the cost. And the cost would be everything. The night of the wedding came not with bells and celebration, but with shadows. No invitations were sent. No neighbors arrived. No church opened its doors. Instead, a lantern was lit in the parlor, its dim light trembling against faded wallpaper, and two young people, brother and sister, were summoned to stand before their father. The air smelled of kerosene and mildew. The girl's dress was not white, but yellowed with time, her hair pulled back with trembling hands. Her brother stood beside her, his face pale, eyes refusing to meet hers. Her father opened the Bible, though his words came not from love but commandment. He spoke of vows, but the words twisted like thorns. He spoke of covenant, but his voice held no mercy. Their mother stood nearby, weeping silently into her shawl, her tears falling like beads onto the floorboards. And when the ritual ended, when the words were spoken, and the binding complete, there was no applause, no music, no embrace. Only silence, heavy, suffocating, eternal. From that night onward, the house changed. The rooms, once merely oppressive, became cages. Each step the girl took echoed with the weight of destiny fulfilled. Her brother, now her husband, sat in corners with his head bowed, his hands clenched into fists that trembled with shame. They rarely spoke, for words could not bridge the chasm between them. They were prisoners of blood, bound by the will of a father who believed the world could be rewritten to suit his own obsession. The seasons turned, but inside the farmhouse time did not heal. It only deepened the cracks. By the time she was 19, her body carried its first child, a child born not of love, but of command. The birth was difficult. The midwife, sworn to secrecy, arrived in the dead of night. The baby cried weakly, its limbs twisted, its features strange. The midwife's eyes filled with dread, but she dared not speak. She wrapped the infant in cloth and handed it to the girl, who stared down at the fragile life in her arms with a mixture of horror and tenderness. It was her child, yet it was also a mirror of everything she had been forced to endure. The years became a cycle of pregnancy, birth, and grief. Some children survived, bearing deformities that set them apart from the world. Others died before their first breath could even cool in the air. Each grave was dug quietly in the orchard behind the house, marked only with stones. Neighbors noticed the small mounds of earth, but they said nothing. In rural towns, silence is its own law. People whispered behind closed doors, but no one intervened. No one came knocking. The church, whose bells could be heard from the farmhouse windows, turned away its gaze. To acknowledge the truth would have meant confronting the sickness festering in their own flock. The girl grew into a woman under this weight. Her body bore scars of childbirth. Her hands grew rough from work, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She carried her children in her arms, each one a fragile testament to what happens when blood is forced to consume itself. She sang to them in whispers, rocking them in the dim light of the attic, her lullabies cracked and trembling. Some nights she pressed her forehead to the glass of the attic window, staring into the distance, wondering what life would have been had she been allowed to choose. Her brother husband withered beside her. His guilt gnawed at him. His silence deepened into despair. He drank when he could, though liquor only magnified his shame. Sometimes rage overtook him, not at her, but at himself, at the father who had set them on this path. Yet rage could not undo vows. Rage could not unmake blood. And so he drifted between fury and grief, a man broken by a destiny he had never sought. The father grew old, but never repented. His word remained law, his voice still commanding even as his body weakened. He walked the halls with a cane, its tip tapping against the floorboards like a drumbeat of control. To the townspeople, he was a stern man, perhaps eccentric, but respected enough that they never questioned his ways. They saw his children only from a distance, pale figures who rarely left the house. They dismissed their strange appearances, the awkward gait, the haunted eyes. It was easier to look away. By the time 25 years had passed since her girlhood, the woman's life had become a litany of sorrow. She had borne children into a world that never wanted them and buried many more than she held. Her body was aged before its time, her spirit worn thin. Yet still she endured, because what choice did she have? There was no escape, no one to rescue her, no place in the world beyond the farmhouse that would accept her and the children she had brought into being. The house, once merely a dwelling, became a tomb of living souls. Its walls held generations of whispers. Its beams sagged under the weight of secrets never spoken aloud. The attic window still faced the hills, but even that faint glimpse of freedom had lost its promise. She no longer traced stars into the glass. She no longer dreamed. And when her story ended, it did so without ceremony. No gravestone bore her name. No church rang its bells. The town allowed her memory to sink beneath silence, the truth buried along with her body. Yet the house remained, standing as a scar against the landscape, its broken windows staring blankly into the world, its floorboards groaning with the echoes of lives lived in bondage to blood. Her story was not written in books. It was carried in whispers, in rumors half believed, in the way children dared each other to wander near the abandoned farmhouse. It was buried by America itself, forgotten not because it was untrue, but because it was too shameful to remember. And yet, even buried, the truth breathes. It lingers in the wind through the trees, in the silence of small towns that choose not to see, in the shadow of families who lock their secrets behind closed doors. Because she was raised not to live, not to choose, not to love. She was raised only to marry her brother, and that truth, though buried, cannot be erased. And now, as the echoes of her story fade, I want to leave you with a question. How many lives have been silenced? How many names erased? Not by strangers, but by families, by towns, by a nation too ashamed to remember? If her voice could not be heard in her own lifetime, then let it be heard now, through us, through you. If this story has unsettled you, if it has reminded you how fragile freedom can be, I ask you to share it, to keep it alive, so it cannot be buried again. And if you wish to walk further into the shadows of history, into more stories of secrecy, silence, and survival, then join me. Subscribe. Turn the bell so you will never miss the next forgotten truth. Because these are not just stories of the past. They are warnings. They are mirrors. They are echoes of what still waits in the dark.